August 1296. A Chinese diplomat named Zhou Daguan has been traveling for months, down the coast, up a great river, and across a lake so vast that for a full day he cannot see the far shore. Then the towers appear, stone spires above the tree line, sheathed in gold, causeways wide enough for armies, and spreading out beneath them, farther than he can walk in a day, a city, vaster in footprint than any city on earth. Zhou Daguan will spend 11 months here, writing down everything he sees: the markets, the festivals, the king riding out on an elephant, sacred sword in hand. His notebook will survive as the only eyewitness account of this place at full strength. Here is what he cannot know. He is describing a city that is already running out of time. Within 4 generations, the kings will be gone, the fields will empty, the forest will begin taking the suburbs back, street by street, and the killer will not be fire or plague or the army at the gates. The thing that built this city is the thing that will destroy it: water. Welcome to Zenith and Dust, where we trace how empires rise and what they leave behind. If that sounds like your kind of journey, take a second to subscribe and like. Now, back to the water. To understand Angkor, start with the rain. In this corner of Southeast Asia, the year has 2 seasons, and both of them are extreme. For half the year, the monsoon drowns the land. For the other half, almost nothing falls at all. Feast, then famine, written into the sky itself. Most societies learn to endure a climate like that. The Khmer decided to re-engineer it. In the year 802, on a mountaintop north of the Great Lake, a king named Jayavarman II was consecrated in a Hindu rite that declared him Chakravartin, universal ruler, a god-king with a divine mandate. We know of that morning because it was carved into stone by his successors centuries later as the founding moment of an empire. What his dynasty built over the next 400 years was not, first and foremost, an empire of soldiers. It was an empire of engineers. They dug reservoirs the size of small seas. The greatest of them, the West Barai, stretches 8 kilometers long and 2 wide, dug and banked by hand, holding some 50 million cubic meters of water. Stand on its shore today, and you cannot see across it. 12 centuries later, it still holds water. Around these reservoirs, generation after generation, the Khmer wove a web. Canals, moats, embankments, channels feeding rice paddies, a machine for capturing the flood and spending it slowly through the dry months. Archaeologists call Angkor the hydraulic city. The machine paid out in the only currency that mattered: rice. A surplus large enough to feed an empire, to free hundreds of thousands of hands for armies, temples, dancers, and stone carvers. And the city grew to match, not upward like a walled European town, outward, a low green metropolis of house mounds, orchards, ponds, and temples stitched together by water, sprawling across more than 1,000 square kilometers. Home, at its height, to perhaps 700,000 to 900,000 people. The most extensive urban complex the pre-industrial world would ever build. The bet had paid off. The Khmer had taken the sky's feast and famine and flattened it into permanent abundance, as long as the machine held. Early in the 12th century, a king named Suryavarman II decided to build something no one had ever built. The problem was stone. Millions of sandstone blocks, some weighing over a ton, and the nearest quarries lay at the foot of the Kulen Hills, 35 kilometers away. More than 50 quarries have been found there. The solution was already flowing through the city, the canals. The same network that watered the rice fields became a freight system. Block after block floated down the channels to the building site. The irrigation grid built the temple. Roughly 3 decades and, by some estimates, tens of thousands of workers later, it stood complete, Angkor Wat, dedicated to the god Vishnu. 5 towers rising like the peaks of the cosmic mountain, ringed by a moat standing in for the ocean at the edge of the universe. It remains to this day the largest religious monument on Earth. Think about what that means. The temple is a diagram of the cosmos, drawn in stone by a city that believed it had mastered its element. This is the city Zhou Daguan walked into in 1296. He describes a golden tower at the city's heart, processions of hundreds, palaces whose window frames were mirrored in gold. He wrote down how people fished, argued, traded, bathed, the daily heartbeat of a capital at its zenith. But a machine this size has one property its builders never carved into any stele. It never stops needing maintenance. Every canal silts. Every embankment slumps. Every channel wants, slowly, to return to being a river. For 4 centuries, the empire paid that maintenance bill without blinking, because the system was the empire. It worked as long as the rains stayed inside the range the machine was designed for. And then they didn't. We know exactly when it started, because the trees wrote it down. In the highlands of Vietnam grow cypress trees, old enough to remember the 14th century. Each year of good monsoon leaves a wide ring. Each year of drought, a narrow one. Scientists have read 7.5 centuries of weather out of those rings. And in the 1340s, the rings collapse. For roughly 2 decades, the monsoon failed. A mega drought parked over the empire. Then, the sky reversed. Monsoon years so violent they tore at the land, followed in the early 1400s by a second great drought. Now look at Angkor's machine through that lens. It was built to smooth out a predictable cycle, to bank a reliable flood against a reliable dry season. Nothing in its design anticipated decades of drought, punctuated by floods beyond anything in living memory. The droughts starved the network. The floods attacked it. South of the city, canals choked with sand. Near the city's edge, floodwater carved the main channel 8 meters down into the earth. So deep, the grid could no longer drink from it. The trench is still there. The sediment dates the wound to around 1345. And here is the cruelest part. Researchers who mapped the network, over 1,000 interconnected channels, gates and embankments, found that damage didn't stay local. A failure in one channel redirected water and sediment into the next and the next. Fixing any one break demanded enormous labor. At exactly the moment, failed harvests meant there was less labor to command. No villain, no single storm, a system that had grown too vast, too interdependent, too big to fail, and too big to fix. The city's greatest asset had become its single point of failure. People saw which way the water was flowing. Soil cores from the city's core show land use declining from the early 1300s, a full century before the date history books give for the fall. The court drifted south, toward the river junction where Phnom Penh would rise, closer to the sea, where trade with Ming China now paid better than rice. And historians argue that a quieter revolution mattered just as much. Theravada Buddhism was spreading through the land, and in its worldview, the age of god-kings and mountain temples was simply over. In 1431, an army from the Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya reached Angkor and sacked it. The chronicles remember that year as the end of the empire. But you already know better. 1431 wasn't the murder. It was the obituary. The forest took the suburbs first. The wooden city, the houses, the markets, everything Zhou Daguan actually walked through, rotted away in a generation, leaving only the stone bones of the gods. But Angkor never entirely died. At Angkor Wat itself, the lamps stayed lit. Theravada monks tended the temple continuously, through the empire's fall, through the centuries of silence. Pilgrims kept arriving. In the 1600s, Japanese travelers left inscriptions on its pillars. When European writers later called it a lost city, the Khmer could have told them the truth. Nothing was lost. They had always known exactly where it was. Still, no one alive remembered how big it had been. Then, in 2012 and 2015, archaeologists flew lasers over the forest. LiDAR, light pulses that slip between the leaves and map the bare earth below. When the canopy was stripped away, the whole machine surfaced at once. Grids of streets, thousands of house mounds, the ghost lines of canals. Even Mahendra Parvata, the mountain city where a king became a god in 802, resolved out of the jungle 12 centuries after his coronation. The city didn't vanish. It was written in a script we had forgotten how to read, in earth and water instead of stone. Every civilization makes a bet with its environment. The Khmer bet on water, and for 600 years they won bigger than anyone had ever won before. The same canals raised the temples and fed the multitudes. The same canals, wounded by a changing sky, bled the city out. The Zenith and the Dust were never two different stories. They were one design, read at two moments in time. This has been Zenith and Dust. If this story was worth your time, a like tells us, and a subscribe means you'll be standing with us when the next empire rises. See you at the next summit.